I don't often discuss the merits of strange things that have been deemed paranormal phenomenon. That's mostly because this stuff usually falls out of the purview of science. If something is supernatural, it is by definition beyond that which is natural, and only that which is natural can be quantified with observations, repetition, and more. Though paranormal or supernatural phenomenon cannot literally be quantified in a skeptical scientific way, they do hold ethnological, anthropological, and cultural value. On top of that, there are some phenomena that can be picked apart to find a real-world explanation. Most cryptids, for example, are misidentified flesh and blood animals that people witness, rather than spooky, ooky apparitions that don't make sense based on the world in which we live. UFOs straddle the line between the bizarre parts of the natural and supernatural, and therefore offer quite a bit of meat for us to sink our fangs into. Let's delve into one of the most famous UFO stories that gifted UFO nut and skeptic alike some of the best photographic proof of the existence of UFOs. The report begins on May 11th, 1950, in Sheridan, Oregon at 7:30 p.m. A pair of photographs were taken by farming couple Paul and Evelyn Trent of what appears to be an unidentified flying object. Evelyn was moseying on back to her farmhouse after doing some choring when she noticed some wacky shit in the sky above the farm. A sluggish, silver, metallic, disc-shaped thingamabob heading towards her from way off in the northeastern distance. Evelyn hollered to her husband Paul to come take a gander at this weird shit she's seeing in the sky, and Paul came out to see what the hubbub was all about. After bearing witness to the same flying, moving bauble as his wife and standing there watching it dumbfounded, his light bulb came back on and he put on his thinking cap and scampered on back inside to get a camera to capture the thing. Camera obtained, he came back out and was only able to snap off 2 photographs of the object before it had had enough of being gawked at and hovering slowly and sped the hell out of there to the west. This is the most popularized version of the McMinnville UFO story. The various versions of the story don't differ to such a degree that the entire thing comes across as a complete and utter hoax, as in other types of encounter narratives. But before I get into an analysis of how this popular portrayal of events came to be, let's get a handle on the very first recording of the event. Telephone Register Report. The Trent's story first came to be known by anyone outside of their immediate family almost a month after the incident. The Telephone Register newspaper in the nearby McMinnville, Oregon, was the first to break this story on June 8, 1950. It differed a bit from the ones they would give to a handful of reporters in the days and years that followed. According to that 1950 newspaper article, quote, "Taken nearly a month ago from the backyard of his farm home, 11 miles southwest of McMinnville, Trent's pictures were unearthed when a telephone register reporter followed a tip given by Ralph and Frank Whitman, McMinnville bankers. They'd seen the pictures and were willing to back Trent's reputation veracity. Trent was reluctant to allow use of the pictures. I'm afraid I'll get into trouble with the government, he worried." End quote. The rest of the article quotes Evelyn Trent's recounting of the story, as it states, "It was getting along toward evening, about 7:45, said Trent's wife, Evelyn. We'd been out in the backyard. Both of us saw the object at the same time. The camera! Paul thought it was in the car, but I was sure it was in the house. I was right. And the Kodak was loaded with film. Paul took the first picture. The object was coming in toward us and seemed to be tipped up a little bit. It was very bright, almost silvery, and there was no noise or smoke." End quote. Trent explained that he took the first picture, rewound his film as fast as possible, and then, as the object gathered speed and turned toward the northwest, he had to move rapidly to his right to get the second picture. Both were snapped within 30 seconds, he estimated. Size, speed, distance? Neither Trent nor his wife would hazard a guess. Quote, "It was moving awfully fast is all I know," said Trent. Both photographs clearly indicate a superstructure, and the photo at right resembles the flying submarine seen by airlines pilot over the Cascade Mountains nearly a year ago. What are they? Well, I think they're ours, said Trent. The reporter said he hoped so. The newspaper article reporter Bill Powell had convinced Paul Trent to loan him the photo negatives for the story. Powell also used the time with the photos before publishing the story to examine for evidence of tampering. He found no such evidence. Not that Powell and his guys were absolute experts in image tampering at the time, but hey, probably better at finding that sort of stuff out than your average person. So, this first recounting of the story states that both of the Trents saw the UFO at the same time. Keep that in mind as I continue. Lou Gillette, the Oregonian Report. A couple of days after the interview with the telephone register, the Trents gave another interview to Lou Gillette, a McMinnville radio station host. This interview was quoted and referenced in a June 10, 1950 article in the Oregonian newspaper. In the article, the story is recounted thusly. Quote, Evelyn Trent was walking back to her farmhouse after feeding her caged rabbits. Before reaching the house, she noticed a slow-moving metallic disc-shaped object heading in her direction from the northeast. She yelled for her husband Paul, who was inside the house. He claimed that upon leaving the house, he also saw the object. After watching the object for a short time, he went back inside their home to obtain a camera. He said he managed to take 2 photos of the object before it sped away to the west. Paul Trent's father also claimed he briefly viewed the object before it flew away. End quote. This is different than the account from the 8th, in that Evelyn was the first to see the UFO and that Paul was inside the house at the time and that he left the house and then went back in to get his camera. The discrepancies may be explained away because no 2 people tend to give the same story of the same event, what with perspectives and all. On top of that, reporters also usually don't report the exact words they are told by a witness. They often paraphrase. Another explanation is that newspaper articles are edited to make the story more streamlined and easier to read. The Trent story was then picked up by many different news outlets. One specifically also got permission to take the photos for analysis and reproduction, the International News Service. Even Life magazine did a big ol' spread for the story, replete with glamour shots of the Trents and their photos. The Trents were promised by the International News Service that they'd get their photos back, but they never did. In fact, Life notified the Trents much later that they didn't know where the negatives ended up. They were seemingly lost to time. The Condon Committee and Hartman Report. It was the second report from Gillette and the Oregonian that was picked up and used by many other researchers when investigating the report. Planetary scientist William K. Hartman has a long and decorated career, including being the first guy to convince the scientific community that Proto-Earth was hit by a second planet, Theia, with the leftover bits becoming the moon, as well as lots of Mars stuff, like the Mariner 9 Mars Mapping Project and the Mars Global Surveyor Imaging Team. Back in the late 1960s, he was involved with the Condon Committee, a government-funded UFO research project based at the University of Colorado Boulder. The Trent photo negatives were rediscovered in 1967 in the files of the United Press International, which was the news service which merged with the International News Service a few years prior. These negatives weren't returned to the Trents as per their wishes, but were instead loaned out to Dr. Hartman for his analysis of the case as part of his UFO research project. In this project, the case was labeled Case 46 and was the first of their photographic case studies. Hartman decided to go interview the Trents again, remarking on their sincerity in not asking for money for the photos or looking for fame. Hartman wrote to the UFO committee that this was one of the few UFO reports where all forms of investigation, geometry of the photos, psychology of those involved, and physical evidence were consistent with a UFO really being there and really being witnessed by 2 people. Hartman did a photometric analysis of the photos. This test is a great way to view a proposed light source and where the light would reflect or bend depending on the camera, angle of the sun, and shapes of the objects. According to Hartman's analysis, the underside of the silvery object appeared to be lighter than the underside of the oil tank in the left foreground. This difference could be from absorption and scattering of light due to gas or dust in the atmosphere. similar thing that makes mountains sometimes appear washed out and bluish. Seeing this effect on the silvery disc might mean it was truly farther away from the camera than the oil tank was, rather than a small object closer to it. On the flip side, Hartman pointed out how there still remained the possibility that the images were faked. He noted that there appears to be 2 lightly colored wires above the saucer and suggested that those may be cause for concern for the object's validity. The object also seems to be roughly in the same point in both photos, despite the photos being taken in 2 positions. Though he found that the object does follow the light physics one would expect of a huge faraway object, his analysis cannot rule out that the object was a small model suspended by a near-invisible wire. Hartman's next observation would become the main sticking point in the true believer's craw. The overall lighting of the images does fit with the time at which the Trents stated they took the photo, around sunset, but the major objects in the images are lit from the east. Everyone knows the sun sets in the west, so this is a huge ball-busting discrepancy here. The house, as a great example, has a shadow under its roof that would suggest the photo was taken during daylight. If this is true, then the image better fits being taken during mid-morning, say 10 a.m. Once Hartman was done with his investigation, he returned the photo negatives to the United Press International. Then the organization informed the Trents of the rediscovery of the photos. 3 years later, in 1970, the Trents asked editor of the News Register Philip Bledin for the photos back. Bledin asked his employer to return them, and they did, but they never notified the Trents that they'd done so. Bruce Maccabee investigation. 5 years later, Bruce Maccabee, optical physicist for the US Navy and ufologist, had been digging through the records of the News Register for research when he came upon the negatives of the Trents' photos. So it turns out they'd still not been returned. Maccabee made sure they did this time, but not before analyzing them himself. Just like Dr. Hartman, Maccabee found that there really wasn't any evidence that the photos were hoaxes. Photoshop didn't exist back then, so you really had to work hard to get a good-looking fake photo. The photos do show a real physical object. Maccabee came to a similar conclusion as Dr. Hartman in that the brightness of the lighting in the image does suggest that the object is farther away than the objects in the fore and middle ground. Bruce conducted a deep photogrammetric analysis of the photos based on physical data he obtained from the original site. He produced a map of the scene and tried to estimate the crossing point of the line of sight of the UFO between the 2 photographs. He did this based on known points, like the anchorage points for the electric wires on the house and the garage. Bruce also used Paul Trent's reported positions during both shots. Bruce concluded the crossing point would be right under the power lines, or a few feet farther. To Bruce, this was evidence that the object was not a small model suspended by wires, and he did not find any other forms of evidence that there were any wires. Bruce countered the lighting discrepancy brought up by Hartman with weather. Apparently, cloud conditions at the time could have been the cause of the weird shadows on the garage. Sure, okay. To know for sure of the atmospheric conditions at this time, on this day, one would have to go digging in the weather records for the area. Fortunately, journalist Robert Sheaffer already did that in 1969. The U.S. Department of Commerce Weather Bureau's observations of the weather on May 11, 1950 from 6 to 7 p.m. show perfectly clear skies. Only a few clouds had been spotted through the day. This is one heckin' discrepancy right there. Bruce Maccabee would go on to more or less tarnish his reputation among UFO skeptic analyses when he unambiguously validated a known hoax, the Gulf Breeze UFO photos. These photos were taken in 1987 Gulf Breeze, Florida, and show a UFO shining a light down on a street. This case was found to be an out-and-out hoax when a small styrofoam model was found in the attic of the guy who reported the incident, Ed Walters. However, Maccabee's analyses found them to be real. On top of that, Bruce Maccabee did it again with the Lawton Triangle UFO hoax. This time, Maccabee analyzed the photos of what appeared to be some brightly colored, lit-up UFOs photographed over Lawton, Oklahoma in 2002. Maccabee conducted an analysis of the photos and found them to be authentic. They were then found to be hoaxes when the hoaxer slipped up and made it obvious. I bring this up because it shows that Maccabee isn't the most reliable when it comes to UFO photograph analyses. As the clearest and most straightforward UFO photographs up until the 1950s and 60s, the McMinnville UFO photos would be analyzed to death for the next half-century and even till today. In the 1980s, a couple journalists, Philip J. Klass and Robert Sheaffer, analyzed the photos again and concluded that the object is a hoax. Their argument was based around the lighting discrepancy noted by William Hartman, and that if this was a lie from the Trents, that the rest of their story should be treated more skeptically. Klass and Sheaffer claimed that the Trents already had an interest in UFOs before their report. Klass and Sheaffer went with the hypothesis that the object is actually a small model suspended from the power lines, though they went a step further to speculate that the model looks like a funky side view mirror that they were putting on Fords at the time. Klass then also used the fact that the Trent's story changed over the years as evidence of the hoax. Robert Sheaffer then put all of his work, including everything on the McMinnville UFO, on his Debunker website. The last revision to it was in 2014, but it seems as though much of his critical writing about Maccabee's work was originally made in 1995. The Trents were again interviewed in 1997, shortly before they passed away. Here, they claimed that they had initially thought they had captured photographs of a secret military aircraft. They feared that if they brought the photos to the authorities right away, that they'd get into deep doo-doo. Back in the 50s, you had to develop your film before you could actually see or print the photos you took. So, as it turned out, the Trents didn't immediately bring their photos to the authorities. They still had a bunch of blank photos to take before the roll of film was used up, so it wasn't until May 14th of 1950 that they were able to finish up the roll. The lack of urgency in getting those extraordinary UFO photos to someone to see them until they had used up the roll could be explained away as the Trents' fear of ridicule from others or persecution from the government. Perhaps this is more likely back in the 50s, as this is definitely not the case in today's public consciousness. Apparently, Paul Trent mentioned his experience and his photos to his banker, Frank Hartman, who then found them interesting enough to display the photos in his bank. The story was recontextualized in 2010 by Time magazine for the 60th anniversary. These are, after all, the most publicized, discussed, and debated images in UFO history. The last piece of this puzzle was published online in 2013 by researchers Antoine Gaussin, Francois Louange, and Jeff Quick using a software they created called IPACO. They conducted another series of tests on the photographs with their photo analysis software. They argue that the geometry of the photographs is most consistent with a small model with a hollow bottom being suspended on the power lines by a wire or thread. To them, it was definitely a hoax. So, where are we now? Not far, really. It's more likely that the thing is faked than it is a real object, but if it is a real object, then whether or not it is truly an extraterrestrial ship is another conversation entirely. I do find the case to have some details that don't reflect authenticity, so I lean on the skeptical side. What about you? Like with many interesting unexplained events, the McMinnville UFO photos have sparked the creative and enterprising spirits of the people of McMinnville. What with the publicity the event has brought to the town, people came up with a festival to celebrate the event and pretty much anything even tangentially related to ufology. It's held at the ironically named McMinnville's Hotel pretty much every year close to the date the UFO is spotted. They do all sorts of other UFO-related stuff, and even the furries have taken over. The next one will be May 16th and 17th of 2025. Not entirely unlike the festival thrown for the Van Meter Visitor in Van Meter, Iowa. For more interesting stories about nature, the history of life, or what goes bump in the night, subscribe, like this video, drop a comment in the comment section below, and hit the bell icon to stay in the know with everything Edge. Thanks for watching.